Morning, everyone. It's great to be presenting in front of a few people instead of sitting at home at a desk presenting to a screen. My name is David Mellett, and I'm one of the regional coordinators in the Carrow offices. I'm based in the Atlantic Seaboard North, which is hosted by Mayo County Council. It's one of 4 regional offices that was established in 2018 by the sector, funded by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications. And we're working with local authorities to support and coordinate climate action and deliver and mobilise action at a local level. There's been a lot of discussions internationally and nationally over the last number of weeks, particularly with the launch of the National Climate Action Plan. And those discussions have been focused primarily around our emission targets and what individual sectors need to do to get to our net zero society. And in those discussions, sometimes we forget why we need to change and reduce our emissions. And that's because our climate is changing, and that is resulting in more severe and extreme weather events that are impacting on the ground. We were talking about the emission targets, which is getting a lot of press these days, but the reasons why we need to reduce the emissions are sometimes lost in those discussions. And it's because our climate is changing, resulting in more severe and more frequent weather events, and the projections are that they are going to get worse. And while that climate change is a global challenge, particularly the mitigation side, it's at a local level that the impacts of climate change and weather events are being felt, and from where the responses to climate change will be enacted. And local authorities have a key role to play in that adaptation, planning and implementation, and understanding where those risks and vulnerabilities are key to developing the appropriate adaptation pathways. So the National Adaptation Framework required a number of state agencies and government departments to develop sectoral adaptation plans. It also required all 31 local authorities to develop adaptation strategies, which were all adopted by the sector by September of 2019. And that sets out a number of actions for local authorities. Firstly, to adapt their own services, to support communities build resilience, and also to support the implementation of sectoral actions at that local level. And within those local authority strategies, they recognise the need to record the impacts of weather and climate events on the ground, and also to better collect the costs associated with those events, particularly the costs associated with our response to them. And that type of information was recognised as being needed to help identify the spatial distribution and areas of vulnerability and increased risk from climate change. That in turn would inform appropriate climate adaptation planning and help us develop targeted and meaningful and cost-effective solutions to those impacts from climate change. So to help address that, we developed a simple system that would facilitate the collection and viewing of the impacts of weather events on the ground for our local authority staff. So initially in 2019, we put a proposal together and submitted it to the Public Sector Innovation Fund, and we were successful in getting some funding to help us develop that proposal into a concept and a pilot. We also had some support from Climate Ireland and a number of local authorities in getting it to a pilot stage. And it was piloted in Mayo County Council initially in 2020 before being rolled out as a pilot to a number of other local authorities with the aim of eventually rolling it out across the sector. We have, over the last few months, been working with ESRI in refining and taking on board the learnings from those pilots and the feedback, and we're in a position now that we can roll it out. And we have started that process in my region at the minute, with the plan to roll it out across the other local authorities in the new year. And given that we are talking about innovation, just to note, it won the Chambers Ireland Innovation Award in 2020 as well. So what is the Wire app? Well, essentially there's 2 elements to it. Firstly, there's the data collection side, and secondly, there's the viewing and analysis of the data by the climate action team within the local authority. There's also 2 types of users identified for the system and for the app. Firstly, we have the unregistered users, so the app can be made available to all local authority staff, and their role is in the data collection side. The registered users then we'd see these being the GIS officer and the climate action team, and they will have the data collection functionality, but very importantly, they'll have also access to the data itself. They'll have viewing and editing rights and approval of the unregistered users and the ability to create reports. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So looking at the unregistered users, as I say, their main role is on the data collection side, and we have developed a simple data collection form which can be accessed through the ArcGIS Survey 123 app, which can be downloaded from any of the app stores and downloaded to a work mobile phone. It is targeted at all local authority staff, or can be made available to all local authority staff, but that's dependent on what each individual local authority is appropriate for them. But the form itself was developed for staff responding to the events on the ground. And we had to have a balance here between the amount of data we would like to see collected against what was reasonable and feasible to be collected by the staff who were primarily concerned in responding to the event. So there was a lot of learnings from the pilot on finding that right balance. Moving then to the registered user, these will require an ESRI license, and most local authorities do have a number of licenses available. They also need to be nominated by the local authority, and we will put them up in the system as the registered user. As I've said, they will have the data gathering functionality similar to the unregistered user, but critically, they will also have access to the Wire hub, which will be restricted by username and password. Here, the registered users will have viewing rights to the data. Some of those users will have editing rights, and others then will have approval rights of the unregistered users' data. So that unregistered users' data needs to be checked for appropriateness and robustness before it is accepted. But that data is available on the system and can be filtered out as well. So what we're asking the unregistered users, the staff on the ground responding to events, to do is, in addition to responding to the event, in this case a flooded road, is to access the Wire app on their phone, which is accessed through the app that I mentioned. We're asking them to record the time, date and location of the event, and that is automatically geolocated on the phone. We're asking them to, through the series of forms, to click on the type of event. In this case, it's a high rainfall event leading to surface water flooding. Then we're asking them to identify the receptor and the level of impact. So in this case, it's infrastructure and it's road, and it's a moderate level of impact, and we have helpful hints as to what is high, medium and low levels of impact. And critically as well, we're asking them to take at least one photograph of the impact, and that will be useful. In this case, for example, we can put a survey team out later on and get the level of flood water. So that kind of ends their level of input into the Wire app, and that data then goes into the system. And then you move on to the registered user, who will have access to a number of tools in the hub, such as the map viewer here. And here you can see all the various data that has been collected by the staff on the ground. And within the map viewer, we have developed various filters and query functions to allow the climate action team to analyse that data and filter it down to answer the questions that they're asking at the time. So for example, if they're just concerned around flooding, they can filter out the climate hazard flooding events. If they're just interested in the high level impacts, that can be filtered out as well. If, for example, a road engineer is only concerned about what has impacted the road network, they can filter out the receptors and the road, and they can also filter by date and location, and they can filter by multiples of those, so it can just be the roads, for example, looking at flooding. There's also tools within the map viewer to generate various reports, and we can also change background maps and other similar functionalities that are typical on the ArcGIS platform. In the hub as well, we've also developed a bespoke dashboard, so the climate action team can get a quick view of the reporting, what has come in. Typically there on the bottom one you can see, what type of impact is impacting that particular county or city the most. And in this case, from the scribe we took from the pilot, it was the rainfall events. And again, there's various filters in the dashboard as well to provide information to the user. So the benefits to the local authority itself, as I mentioned at the start, it'll help us identify the local areas of increasing risk and where the issues are happening now. And that will in turn feed into a risk and vulnerability assessment. And we're currently working with Climate Ireland on developing a semi-quantitative risk and vulnerability methodology for the sector, which the data from the Wire app will also feed into. So understanding where those risks are will help us inform the adaptation planning, help us prioritise areas for action, and it will also assist us in developing appropriate projects and project justification and cost-benefit analysis with information around frequency, severity of damage. And while it won't directly capture the cost, it will provide a flag that there may be costs associated with our response, and we can go back over our records to pull out those costs. And we're already seeing some of the funding pools around adaptation looking for this type of information. For example, the Roads Adaptation Grant that came out earlier this year looked for the frequency and severity of damage to be provided as part of the justification for the project proposals that were put forward. So the information from the Wire app will help with those type of grant applications. Additionally, we have been in discussions with other organisations that will benefit from the data set that will be produced by the Wire app. So for example, the OPW would like to use the data set to help calibrate their flood models to make more robust projections into the future. Climate Ireland are looking to pool together the national and regional data sets on hazards and risks, and this local level information will be very valuable in building that national data set that can be used not just by local authorities but across our sectoral partners. And also we've been working with Mellett on the National Flood Forecasting System, which will be rolled out in the coming weeks across the sector. And again, the feedback on what how a weather event actually impacts on the ground will help them calibrate their impact forecasts under that system as well. So just in conclusion, to get to that stage of adaptation action and actually developing the appropriate adaptation pathways and projects, we need to build an understanding of where those risks are and what we need to do. And to feed into all of that is the data. And we feel and hope that the Wire app will be a tool that can be used by the sector to start that process to get us to the stage of the adaptation actions. So, thank you, and questions and answers.